Rome turned 2,771 years old this year. The legend has it was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus. Eventually, Romulus and Remus got into a battle. Romulus won. Hence, that's why the city is called Rome and not Rheims. The Basilica of San Clemente is the final resting place of Saint Clement IV Pope. He was arrested by the Emperor Trajan and sent off to the mines. He continued to spread the gospel, so the Romans tied him to an anchor and threw him into the Black Sea in the year 98. What's remarkable is the upper structure is a 12th century church. It's built on top of a 4th century church, which is built on top of a 1st century house, which has another structure underneath it which has not yet been excavated. Michelle and I went to church here twice since it was only 2 blocks from our hotel and the masses were in English. There is a gladiator practice facility across the street from the Colosseum. The Flavian Amphitheater, the Colosseum's real name, was built about the year 80 AD. It could hold about 50,000 spectators. The sole purpose seems to be a slaughterhouse. Animals were slain in the morning, prisoners were killed at noon, and the gladiators fought in the afternoon. The Colosseum opened to a 100-day festival where an estimated 2,000 men and 9,000 animals were killed. The Arch of Constantine commemorates the victory of Constantine over Maximinus in 312 AD. Constantine finally legalized the Christian religion. The statue is of the Emperor Trajan. If you remember, Trajan had St. Clement arrested. Not exactly consistent with legalizing Christianity, but it's his arch, he can do what he wants. The Arch of Titus was built to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 60 AD. The Roman Forum begins at the Arch of Titus and was essentially Rome's town square. Many temples were built here, only a few are pictured. Julius Caesar was assassinated on March 15th, beware the Ides of March, in 44 BC. His remains were cremated on this spot, which were later turned into a temple to him. The Temple of Vesta housed the eternal flame of Rome. It was thought that as long as the flame burned, Rome would stand. The flame was tended by 6 Vestal virgins chosen from noble families. Before the age of 10, they served a 30-year term and took a vow of chastity. If she completed the term, she was given a huge dowry and allowed to marry. If she was found not to have maintained her virginity, they were buried alive. So we can safely assume that this is not where the term "light my fire" came from. Above is the courtyard of the house where the Vestal Virgins lived, and there's a statue of the head Vestal Virgin. This is the Temple of Romulus, and what's cool about this is that green door is 2,000 years old. It has the original hinges and the original lock, and they still work. On the second day, we visited the monument to King Victor Emmanuel. He was Italy's first king after the country was first unified in 1861. This was the year our Civil War started, but I'm sure you knew that. The size of this statue is deceptive. The mustache you're about to see is 5 feet across. arguably the best view of Rome. It compares to the one from the top of St. Peter's. The Jewish ghetto gets its name from the fact that the Jews were routinely forced to live here. It was the worst real estate in Rome because it was often got the worst of the flooding from the Tiber River. Rome has its own September 11th. In 1943, the Italians figured out who was going to win the war and switched sides. The Germans invaded and occupied Rome on September 11th, 1943. The Germans soon met with the Jewish leaders and said if the Jewish leaders gave them 50 kilograms of gold, the Germans would leave them alone. The Jews managed to pull the 50 kilograms of gold together, only to have the trucks pull up on October 16th to haul them away to Auschwitz. Of the 1,000 or more taken away, only 15 returned after the war. We left the ghetto and went over to Trastevere, which means across the river. The Piazza da Santa Maria is the main square of this section of town. The priest-door, as I call it, was actually very large, and you only see one of several windows here. 2 of the 3 dogs here are made of sand. We saw the Pope's tailor shop. Why it's not at the Vatican is a good question. Mainly what we did in Trastevere is to go on a food tour. They took us to several shops and restaurants, and we sampled ham, cheeses, bakery goods, and pasta. This woman apparently wasn't as excited to see us as we were to see her. Pantheon is one of the main sights to see in Rome. The columns are 40 feet high and 15 feet around and are one solid piece of granite, which is impressive enough until you find out that they were made in Egypt and shipped. The original Pantheon was built in 27 BC, but it was destroyed by fire a couple of times. How does a stone structure get destroyed by fire? Well, I don't really know. The current structure was built by the Emperor Hadrian in 120 AD. It became a Catholic church in the year 609 AD, and services are still held inside today. What's most remarkable about the Pantheon is the dome. The building can fit a perfect 142-foot diameter sphere from top to bottom. The dome was once covered in bronze. Where did it go? Well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The circle in the dome is the main source of light on the inside and is open to the outside. On Pentecost, firemen climb to the top of the dome and pour rose petals in through the hole onto the congregation below. Pantheon is the only ancient building that has been in continuous use since its construction. It's the burial place of King Victor Emmanuel II, his wife and son, and the painter Raphael. The Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola was started in 1626 and finished at the end of the century. You would think that since the church bears his name and has major artwork about his life, he would be buried here. You would be wrong. He's actually buried at another church down the street. St. Ignatius founded the Jesuit order. Pope Francis is a Jesuit priest, the only one to ever become a pope. The artwork in this church was spectacular. The ceiling is second only to the Sistine Chapel. It was painted in 1685 by Andrea Pazzo, a Jesuit lay brother, who also painted the frescoes on the asp above the altar. There is also a wonderful dome in the church. At least it would be if there was real. The dome was actually painted on a flat ceiling. Although St. Ignatius is not buried here, Pope Gregory XV is. This is a relief of St. Aloysius Gonzaga, who I'm sure you know, plays in the NCAA basketball tournament every year. This church just had so much exquisite art in all forms in it. The nativity scene must be new because I couldn't find any other information on it. Finally, there was a fantastic relief of the Annunciation, with God looking down over Mary and Gabriel. The construction of St. Peter's Basilica started in 1506 and was completed in 1616, although work continued inside until the middle of the 17th century. Donato Bramante was the original designer of St. Peter's, but Michelangelo radically revised the plan. The diameter of the dome is the same as that of the Pantheon and stands 446 feet at the summit of the cross on top. On Wednesdays, the Pope holds a public audience in St. Peter's Square. The little dot in front of St. Peter's Basilica is him. The square was designed and constructed by Bernini between 1656 and 1675. It holds more than 300,000 people, so my guess is that there were only about 50,000 people the day we were there. The obelisk in the middle of St. Peter's Square is a bit of a mystery. Best guess is that it's about 4,000 years old. It was taken from Egypt by the Emperor Caligula in about 37 AD. It stood to the west of where St. Peter's Basilica is now for about 1,500 years and was moved to its present location by Pope Sixtus V in 1586. Why? St. Peter was crucified in the shadow of this obelisk. Its location is a testament to the victory of Christianity over paganism. St. Peter's Basilica is free to get into as long as you don't mind standing in line to go through security. These pictures were taken on a Saturday, and I estimate there were about 1,000 to 2,000 people in line. The Swiss Guard is a secret service to the Pope. They were established in the Vatican City by Pope Julius II in 1506.
Con il vescovo Monsignor Antonio Suelta, di Santa Lucia in Ozzano e di Santi Giacomo e Filippo in Verona.
So right about the end of the papal audience is getting to be about lunchtime, and the Pope is starting to get hungry. So he leans over to one of his cardinals and he says, you know, I'd really like a pizza from Luigi's, but I want it hot this time, not like last time. And the cardinal nods his head, picks up his cell phone and says, hello, Luigi. This is Cardinal Rottweiler. The Pope wants his regular pizza, but he wants it hot this time. Do you have relatives now living in Germany? And Luigi says, oh, don't worry, we'll get the Pope his pizza and it'll be hot. It'll be right out of the oven and I'll get my best driver on it. And he says, Giuseppe, he says, I want you to take this pizza and get it right to the Vatican. The Pope wants it hot. So they take it out of the oven, put it in a box. Giuseppe jumps on his scooter and he's off like a shot. So he's ripping through the streets of Rome, zipping in and out of traffic. Of course, can't tell for anybody else. But he's going very fast to the Vatican. And all of a sudden, he passes by a police car. And in that police car is Giovanni. And Giovanni sees him and he goes after him. And he he pulls him over. And Giuseppe's yelling, oh, please let me go. Please let me go. This is for the pizza's for the Pope. I have to bring it there. It has to be hot. So Giovanni says, okay, I'll give you an escort. So boom, the two of them take off like rockets and they go over to the Vatican. Giuseppe runs in the door and he comes out a couple minutes later and Giovanni's still standing there. And Giovanni says, well, was the Pope happy with his pizza? And Giuseppe says, oh, yes, he was very happy. He says, And did you get a nice tip? And Giuseppe says, oh, I got a wonderful tip. And Giovanni says, well, you wouldn't have got here on time if it weren't for me, so I think I should get at least half the tip. And Giuseppe says, okay. This is when you laugh. St. Peter's Basilica is 613 feet long, it's 374 feet wide, and has an area of 474,000 square feet. It will hold 60,000 people. Only the Pope is allowed to say Mass at the altar under the large bronze canopy in the center of the basilica. The letters you see at the base of the dome spell out, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." Those letters are 7 feet tall. Along the nave of St. Peter's are 2 layers of statues that represent the founders of several of the Catholic orders, like the Dominicans, Franciscans, and Jesuits, etc. When viewed from the floor, the statues appear to be the same height. In order for that to happen, the bottom statues are 16 feet high, and the upper statues are 32 feet high. Inside the door of St. Peter's to the right is Michelangelo's most famous sculpture, the Pieta. If you look closely, Mary is actually larger than Jesus. She also has a very youthful appearance, although she would have been about 48 to 50 years old at the time of Jesus' death. There appear to be many paintings on the wall of St. Peter's Basilica, but they're not really paintings at all. They're micro-mosaics. The fear was that due to the flooding from the Tiber River, the humidity would damage paintings. This last one is by Raphael. It's the Transfiguration. We mentioned earlier that St. Ignatius was the one that founded the Jesuit order. Pope Alexander VII's theological writings was what laid out the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. St. Veronica was one of the women that met Jesus on his way to be crucified. She gave him part of her clothing for him to wipe his face. St. Longinus was the centurion who pierced Jesus' side while he was hanging on the cross. Longinus was the one who exclaimed, "Indeed, this was the Son of God." Mark chapter 15, verse 39. He converted and later became a martyr. Lying in state in a glass coffin in St. Peter's is Pope John XXIII. Pope John died in 1963 and was canonized in 2014. One of the signs of sainthood is a lack of decomposition of the body. It's depressing when someone who's been dead since 1963 looks better than you do. See? Remember we said that the dome of the Pantheon was covered in bronze, which was removed? Well, here it is. The solid bronze canopy or baldachin over the altar has columns that are 60 feet high. The baldachin was designed by Bernini and constructed by Pope Urban VIII between 1623 and 1634. The total height of the structure is 95 feet. It covers the Pope's altar and the tomb of St. Peter. This, below the altar, is the tomb of St. Peter. We enter the museum spaces through the courtyard of the Pine Cone. The pine cone is made of bronze and is from the 1st or 2nd century AD. The lion is Egyptian from the 4th century BC. The sphere within a sphere is from 1990. Don't know how it got in there. We actually only saw a small portion of the total of the Vatican museums. Still, it was overwhelming. The amount of art and the unbelievable paintings and frescoes and decorations were just beyond words. The next two frescoes are by Raphael. The first tells the story of when St. Peter was in chains in Rome and an angel came and released him so he could escape. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 12, verses 5 to 12. We'll see the actual chains later. The next fresco is the School of Athens by Raphael to pay homage to the great thinkers of history. At the same time, Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel. When Raphael saw Michelangelo's work, he painted him into this picture. At the end of the Vatican Museum tour is the highlight and must-see of any trip to Rome, the Sistine Chapel. Pope Julius II originally commissioned Michelangelo to carve the sculptures that would be his tomb. However, he later reassigned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but not without a fight. Michelangelo was concerned because he saw himself as a sculptor, not a painter. The Sistine Chapel was a vast undertaking, and being a perfectionist, he didn't want to do a half-assed job. Pope Julius II's original concept was for Michelangelo just to paint the 12 apostles on the ceiling. It kind of got out of control. In addition to the ceiling, he painted the wall behind the altar, the Last Judgment. Taking into account that these were frescoes, which means that wet plaster is applied and that is what is painted. If a mistake was made, the plaster and all had to be scraped off. Michelangelo wasn't without his critics, and when that happens, he painted one of his chief critics as the demon above the door in the lower right-hand corner. The theme of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is nothing less than the history of the world prior to the birth of Christ. The painting of the ceiling and the Last Judgment were considered to be a change in the course of art. On the fourth day, we loaded onto a bus and drove down to Ostia Antica. We also went to the current city of Ostia, the San Sebastian Catacombs, and took a short walk down the Appian Way. Ostia was originally founded in the 4th century BC at the mouth of the Tiber River. It served as a naval base and a seaport. Eventually, however, the river moved, yes, that's a thing, and the city eventually dried up. Here we're walking through a private home with its own private bathroom. If this is a little too claustrophobic for you, you can go down to the public restrooms with 8 of your closest friends. You can see there used to be a wall that separated the ladies' room from the men's room. Here's our guide Ben asking, "Do you want fries with that?" in this ancient restaurant. Here we went down to the current city of Ostia, which appears to be a very pleasant resort town. We spent a little while down there, had some ice cream, and very relaxed and very cool breeze on a very hot day. Water in the background is the Mediterranean Sea. It's crystal clear. You can easily see the bottom in 20 feet of water. The catacombs of San Sebastian were built in the 3rd century AD as a place for Christian burial. The tunnels in the catacombs extend for about 7 miles. Saint Sebastian was a martyr from the 3rd century and is buried in the basilica that sits on top of the catacombs. They originally tried to execute him by shooting him with arrows, but he survived that and was later beaten to death. So what is Quo Vadis? It means, where are you going? Legend had it that Peter was leaving Rome to avoid persecution when he ran into Jesus heading into Rome. Peter asked, "Quo Vadis?" Jesus responded that he was heading into Rome to be crucified again. Peter took this to mean he needed to head back into Rome and face the music. The footprints are supposed to be those of Jesus when he ran into Peter. The Borghese Gallery was easily our second favorite spot in Rome. The gallery was built early in the 17th century by Cardinal Scipione Borghese, nephew to Pope Paul V, and was sold to the Italian government in 1902. It appears that the cardinal was not a religious man. The title cardinal means advisor to the Pope. It's not clear from the history whether he was ever made a priest or not. But he was good at making money and managed to amass a great fortune. He built the gallery to show that off. The gallery contains works by Bernini, Caravaggio, Raphael, Rubens, and Titian, among others. In other words, he had good taste. Central to every room was a sculptural masterpiece. Here we see Bernini's Rape of Proserpina. Why is it a masterpiece? Look at the detail. Here his hand is not just on the flesh, but actually sunken into the flesh, to show Pluto is holding her tightly as he is dragging her down into the underworld. Look at the eyes and the 3-headed dog, like he's looking right at you. Look at this picture by Caravaggio, the Madonna of Palafreniere. It was originally commissioned to be hung in the St. Peter's Basilica. but only lasted there 9 days because of a huge scandal attached to the painting. Pictured is Mary, Jesus, and St. Anne, Mary's mother. First, Jesus is no longer a baby and is painted stark naked without a halo. Second, Mary is bending over showing a lot of cleavage. And last but not least was the model used by Caravaggio for Mary was a well-known prostitute at the time. Here we have David by Bernini. Unlike Michelangelo's David in Florence, who was just standing there thinking, oh, now what have I done? Bernini's David is bringing it. He's gonna hurl that rock like his life depends on it, because it does. Here the painting is also by Bernini, and the head of Goliath is a self-portrait. Next is Carnova's sculpture of Venus as portrayed by Paulina Borghese Bonaparte, Napoleon's sister married into the Borghese family. A woman of her stature posing nude was scandalous at the time. When asked how she could do it, she responded, well, the room wasn't very cold. I almost let this painting go without a comment. This is Raphael's Deposition. Mary, Jesus' mother, has fainted. Mary Magdalene can't believe he's dead. Notice she's holding his hand and the juxtaposition of her pink live skin against his dead gray skin. This is Bernini's Apollo and Daphne. She was so put off by Apollo that she cried out to her mother Gaia to rescue her. She responded by turning her into a tree. And I thought I had some bad dates. I left the gallery to walk through the gardens to see this guy riding this unicycle thing. Notice he's not pedaling. The Piazza del Popolo was a short walk from the Borghese Gallery and lies on the northern edge of the city. You see what was once the northern gate to Rome. The gate was reworked to its current appearance by Bernini in 1655. The obelisk was brought to Rome in 10 BC and found its home here in the piazza in 1589.
Can I point anybody off in any direction? I'm walking towards the steps.
Michelangelo's sculpture Christ carrying the cross. We couldn't get very close because half the church was blocked off. Then this happened. picture I noticed there is a tomb under the altar. That's usually pretty significant. I looked and it was St. Catherine of Siena. If you can equate being named a saint to making the All-Star team, then St. Catherine was an MVP. She was a mystic, which means she had visions of Christ. She suffered stigmata, which are the wounds of Christ. She wrote some heavy-duty theology. Her theological writings impacted theology of the entire Catholic Church, and she was the first woman to be named a doctor of the Church. She's the patron saint of Italy, and she died in 1380. We visited St. Peter in Chains Church, where the chains that imprisoned St. Peter before being released by an angel are kept on display. The real main attraction is the sculpture of Moses by Michelangelo. This was originally meant to be a tomb for Pope Julius II before he redirected Michelangelo to work on the Sistine Chapel. If you look close, you can see he even looks a little bit like Charlton Heston. The tomb of Cardinal Cinzio Personani Aldobrandini. He was made a cardinal in 1593, but was not ordained a priest until 1605. Then he died in 1610. We stayed at the Hotel Lancelot, which was a short walk from the Colosseum. Although we didn't have a private balcony, the hotel had a public balcony up on this top floor, which in a moment you'll see it had a view of the Colosseum. The accommodations were nice, the food was excellent, the staff was fantastic, very helpful, very friendly. We were very happy. Although there wasn't a restaurant per se, they had a menu each night and you could sign up for dinner, where the chef would then make a 4-course meal, which was fantastic. We visited one of Rome's most popular places, the Piazza Navona, after dinner the first night of the tour. It was originally a racetrack built around 80 AD by the Emperor Domitian, but much of what's seen today came in the 1600s. There are several fountains, the most famous of which is in the center, the Four Rivers Fountain, which was designed and built by, guess who? That's right, Bernini. He was a busy guy. The last picture is of the Brazilian embassy. It was purchased from the church with the stipulation that the lights remain lit so that the ceiling could be seen from the street outside. We found this little church nestled between the Colosseum and the Forum. There were lots of nice pictures inside, but it was kind of dark. And unlike the other tourist places, this particular church had people praying inside, so I felt like I was invading, so we didn't spend very much time in there. I thought these two pictures were unique. The motorcycle's made of wood, and this picture is made completely of chicken wire. Finally, we visited the world-famous Trevi Fountain. The fountain is one of the oldest sources of water in Rome, dating back to 19 BC, and uses about 375,000 gallons of water each day. The curtain fountain was built in 1762, and funds gathered from the sale of lottery tickets were used to build it. Legend has it that if you throw a coin over your shoulder into the fountain, you'll return to Rome. About 3,000 euros are gathered each night from the fountain, and also given to a charity that uses the money to feed the hungry. And here's my beautiful bride throwing her coin over her shoulder.